Welcome everybody to SEAL Team 7. My name is Baby Seal. This is my guest SLEEPEZI. We don't really need introductions, so we're not going to do that. He does Final Fantasy 7 stuff. I do Final Fantasy 7 stuff. And it's, we're going to talk about Final Fantasy 7. This is actually our first stream just together, our first dedicated SLEEPEZI SEAL Team 7 since Rebirth released. We obviously were, talking and stuff about the game throughout our experience with it. And of course, we were on the smash hit 200,000 view mega stream with Max Dude. And that was a really good discussion. And then also we've seen each other in person recently. So, we're in the know, but this really is our first time just having a dedicated conversation about Rebirth. So, I'm going to let you do most of the talking in this stream for once. I know usually I dominate.
For once.
I dominate. It's usually 4-1. Baby Seal just talk. But we'll let SLEEPEZI do some talking this time.
Are you sure? You sure about that?
No. No. Yeah.
I feel like it's usually a bunch of rants that can somehow be pieced together by me, by somebody who kind of knows what I'm talking about. I think that you know what I'm saying most of the time.
Okay.
But at the same time, whoever it's its own theory that needs to be deconstructed by the audience.
Yeah, open for interpretation. Yeah. Okay.
For sure.
All right. So you've had some time to reflect on the game, and you've also had some time to, take a look at the extended lore explanations, and gotten to do your typical SLEEPEZI thing and deconstructed images and looked at colors and looked at patterns and looked at visual storytelling. So all in all, just Rebirth, yay or nay?
Rebirth is the yayest of yays that I could have possibly expected. I've never felt so, and I know that everyone's like, I feel this way too, but that when I say this, I am like, it's too close to us specifically, because we've kind of gone on this journey throughout the years kind of together. But Rebirth is a game that was 100% made for me to play. And I think you as well. But when I say that it was made for me, I was like a fucking loveless apologizer, and I was like, this is gonna be what the game is gonna be about, and all of these weird things that I brought up for three years straight. And then to literally at the very end of the game, the thing that the game developers wanted to leave us with is a loveless quote, right? A loveless, nod. It's like you couldn't have made this shit up.
Explain to the audience what you mean.
So at the very end of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it says, "No promises at journey's end." And at the end of Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, and something that people love is a character named Genesis. He says, "Even if the morrow is barren of promises, nothing shall forestall my return." And this also is a phrase connected to what is known in Loveless as the World's End. So instead of Journey's End, World's End, it's the same thing. So when already the game, we could talk endlessly about Loveless, but already the game had heavily alluded to Crisis Core, heavily alluded to Loveless. All of these things that I had been looking at for 3 years, for it to in the end say something like that. It felt like really validating to have known. Like, I don't think that every theory that I had ever come up with was right. Like, I like one of my very first theories was like Rufus was related to like Aerith or something like that, or like that he was also a Cetra. That was one of the reasons why he was able to see the whispers.
Yeah.
These were early times, and
Yeah. Early
had
SLEEPEZI. Yeah.
not understood the full picture of Final Fantasy VII at that point. But I think that I had spent such a long time just trying to figure out why the compilation, what the compilation was trying to say, what it meant to me, and sort of like really starting to get in touch with the way that the game was trying to emotionally resonate with other people. I felt like I feel like a part of it was like, I'm crazy and I've like spent way too long looking at this. But then for that to all somehow really weirdly pay off in a way that I thought would never happen, I think. And it's surreal. The whole game felt surreal to play. Because I couldn't, like, even in the back of my mind, somebody who's like so close to this material was like, they are never gonna, there's not a single way that they can swing this and make it about anything that we've been talking about in a way that is accessible to other people. And I was dead wrong. I was dead wrong about that particular aspect, and nothing has made me happier. Nothing has been so emotionally gratifying to me to both watch, but also to just experience it. And then, like, all of the thematic ties from all of the compilation all coming in right then in this one particular part of Rebirth, and where they seem to be taking that and running with it. It is a game. I've never had an experience with a game like this. And I don't think I ever will, because I don't think that I will ever be this invested in a game and its lore ever, like, at least as far as I'm concerned right now. So I don't know, like, it makes me very emotional to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's hard to describe. And I think that and one of the reasons I haven't like released a video is because I'm trying to be as specific as possible about how this game has made me feel. And I really want the next video that I make to resonate that feeling without it being I was right, I told you so, which I don't think I like all of that is true, but I think that all of the themes that we've talked about are. And then also not just it needs to be a video that people want to watch and will be informed by, but also like sort of this cathartic release I really want to capture properly moving forward. But that takes time to figure out, because it's also a game that has been so overwhelming to play because there's just so much to look at, and so much to go back over, and so much to express and still enjoy. And I've been talking to you here and there since, I've started playing the game, and that we started playing the game, and really trying to get through some of it. But a part of it is just like, we already have said so much about it that feels like it's already shown up. So it's a lot. It's both an emotional sort of cathartic release and journey, along with an attempt to look at something from one step back, which I don't think I've been able to do yet fully, which I think is where I'm sort of stuck a little bit. But it's been a blast, and also I don't think everyone felt like the game was sort of solved. I don't know if I'm like right to say that, and maybe I need some clarification, but when I went to Twitter to finally start to express or see like what people had been saying about the game, it felt like a lot of people felt very certain about everything that had been discussed. And I feel like, from my perspective, having looked at the game for so long, it felt like people were underestimating how much left there was to say and to explore. I feel like it's actually more complicated now in a lot of ways.
I think I get the feeling on both sides, right? So like I do feel like I had this specific feeling that they answered a sufficient amount of questions to feel like, you know, about the nature of things, to feel like they've narrowed the structure of the future to, you know, still plenty of options, but less options. But now as like I've peeled the layers back, and especially with the Ultimania coming out and looked closer, as I've let it fester, I'm kind of back to where you're at, where it's like, wait, they actually could do a lot of different stuff. And within like the experience of the game, so much of it felt very Final Fantasy VII. So like it was easy for me to ignore that structurally it was quite different, like aggressively different, you know, in a lot of ways, and a lot of important ways, setting up for the future. And but they are below the surface, like kind of some of the you know, established lore stuff is really just like filling in gaps that were never filled. You know, like I know Philip Hartshorn and you have talked about this, and I have too, about how you know, the OG had a lot of negative space because of the medium it was told in, but that does not work anymore, especially at the pacing that they've set up for this game. Like, you're gonna spend as much time on these character moments as they do in these games. The plot coherence does need a little bit more backstory, needs to be a little bit more consistent and analog. Like, the progression of character changes can't be so black and white. Like, you know, they're establishing so much about Cloud's identity that we're seeing organic bits of his true self come out over a period of time. So it's not this black and white change. And the same thing is happening with Sephiroth. And we're also seeing like context for why the party doesn't just bail on him. You know, like in OG at the Temple of the Ancients, like, you know, a bunch of the entire party just like whatever, and when he's, you know, beating the piss out of Aerith, you know, there, and there's like, whatever, okay, let's go find him, and like also let's not like try and figure out how she got to the northern continent when like we're flying apparently the only plane in the world because Rufus Shinra wanted it, and now it's a boat and it's the only way to get to the northern continent. Like, you know, there's a bunch of really contrived stuff that you just sort of accept in, you know, a PS1 era game. There's never been a story told in that medium before. Now we're in this new era, and a lot of the stuff that's being established as baseline is just to fill that in. And my initial playthrough, I felt like most of the stuff that I was seeing was that, but like on further reflection, I'm kind of shifting back, like, oh wait, this is setting up for, you know, some really, you know, interesting and maybe, you know, original points of view on the same characters and story, you know?
I'm 100% in agreement with everything you just said. I think that like the part that was really resonating with me in that sense very early on, because I do think that there are parts of it that felt very much the same for me, where it felt very much like a part of it was very completed. And I think that's a lot of what was introduced in the original game, or in the remake, that felt like it was sort of tying up a little bit. But the thing that felt very consistent, and also the part that I was expecting wanted the most to be explored in Rebirth, as far as one of those, I accept this in the original, but I can't, I know that I will not be able to like see it the way, unless they modernize it, is Cloud's journey, and his journey with the group itself, where his sort of spiral into what we know happens at the Northern Crater is so It's too left up to interpretation in the original because there's too many warning signs. Whereas now it's both the other character's perspective of Cloud, being that there's a relationship there. There's a more founded relationship between these characters. So there is not only the willingness, the want for them to treat him as, you know, their friend and take care of him, but also that part of their willingness to accept or attempt to go along with what's happening. And then also there are moments where he just collapses, and you can hear it. There's right before the game's end, Barrett is talking to Cloud, and he is literally just trying to explain what we know is as fact is that there are different worlds and how this whole thing is now functioning in the world. And Barrett just is like, I wouldn't be able to believe you even if you try to explain this more like thoroughly. Like, there's a part of him that has accepted at that moment that Cloud is just not all there. And that, but it's not in like a silly way. It genuinely feels like their relationship has been altered in a way, and there's a really interesting dynamic between all of the characters in Cloud, especially at the end and the ending scenes and everything like that. They nailed that, and I think that's definitely that sort of thought processes. Definitely feels like the antithesis of all of Rebirth is that they really have thought of everything. Mm-hmm. So I think the initial thing that I felt was I was willing to accept everything that they were giving me, which made it feel very conclusive. Right. But then upon further realization of those pieces, you're like, oh, there's still a mystery here. Yeah. It just is such a satisfying package as just a game that I think it took people a second. It took Ever Crisis, I think, to kind of push people to not to like use the Sephiroth, like give them a nudge off the ledge to start really spinning theories. And I think that Ever Crisis will continue to do that for the game moving forward, because until maybe DLC, but just opening that curtain a little bit more of curiosity rather than in Remake being like, what's the Harbinger? What is time in relation to this new story? Yeah. What is Zack's sort of ultimate fate? The big hard-hitting questions that people like immediately could just grab onto and start like, you know, tearing open. Whereas this felt so conclusive that I don't think it warranted people just jumping right into the theories, so to speak.
Yeah, so. I agree, and I think that ultimately by the end of the trilogy, I think you'll be able to play all three games and feel like you have you have enough to feel satisfied with the story. What I think Ever Crisis is doing, though, is it is letting us know in the interim that a lot of these plot points that, you know, maybe we are afraid are incomplete or are just, you know, contextless gobbledygook, have been very meticulously thought about. Like the concepts, particularly Ever Crisis has brought up the Sephiroth's endgame motivation stuff, because Sephiroth is saying things about wanting to bring eternity. He's saying things that, you know, have on their face say, you know, that he's offering salvation to a planet. And I think most people are not super confused about that, but it does seem like this is either just like standard JRPG villain, you know, false god, narcissism stuff, or there is context that they haven't, you know, thought of for this yet. But whatever Christ let us know is, no, they have absolutely thought of it. And it is a massive part of what they're doing, and it gives us confidence in the interim while we wait for the part of the trilogy that's supposed to answer the questions. You know, it gives us some confidence that these questions aren't just like aren't just there for shock value. And I really don't think that the purpose of, I think a side effect of what happens at the ending is, you know, some surprise and some subversion, but I don't think that's its actual value, and I don't actually think that that's its primary purpose. I think the questions that it asks do relate to the core themes of Final Fantasy VII OG and the way they're being, you know, revitalized for Rebirth, and possibly new themes, you know, and new lessons to be learned. And you know, like we're talking about how all of the party members are given this context throughout the game to treat Cloud with, you know, detached, you know, sort of a detached understanding, but ultimately like compassion. Is
you are going right where I was going.
As hard as it was for me to accept the way that Nibelheim looked on its return, because it lost that like kind of Silent Hill vibe where nobody's talking to you and everybody's gaslighting you. You know, like turning it into like the rehab clinic for the robes. That, along with Broden and, you know, kind of the tragic fate of Roche, what those are doing is they're establishing like what I think is modernized, you know, and destigmatized looks at mental health issues. And I think that's really important for, you know, the story that they're trying to tell. It didn't age well the way that it came out in the OG. It's still great, but it didn't age well. So they're giving this context, but also the other thing that giving context and having this kind of analog progression does is, one, we have to recognize that the surprise of his identity is ultimately the reveal of that is never going to hit the same. So instead, what we can do is use it as an opportunity to make the characters come alive. And if the progression is gradual, we get elements of it throughout, it seems more realistic, it seems more relatable. And what's always sold, you know, the remake project in particular, is the characters. And so allowing the characters to live in a breathable, organic space comes across better than trying to put really good characters and making them try and live and breathe in really unrealistic, poorly written scenarios, you know, or brief or rushed scenarios. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that. So I'm gonna move on to the first question here, which is in fact Ever Crisis. So I do want to hear your take on the Ever Crisis stuff. So to set a mood, the Ever Crisis stuff is, there's the first soldier, which is a chapter of Ever Crisis centered around the story of young Sephiroth, 3 Project Zero candidates who eventually become, you know, major parts of Wutai's Shinra Resistance Company, and now we're seeing, you know, maybe little bits of Angeal in there and stuff too. And a lot of that stuff was originally going to be kind of explored in the mobile first-person shooting game, but it's always been part of Ever Crisis's plan to tell parts of these stories. And for context, we do have hard confirmation that these characters, like particularly Glenn and Matt and Lucia, were part of the Re-Trilogy story first, and then they got, you know, Nojima penned a special story. So we just concluded chapter 1 of the first soldier in Ever Crisis, and we got some big revelations at the end. So what were your takeaways and thoughts from that?
So I actually think that what I was going to respond with your discussion about compassion feels very accurate to explain sort of my feelings on Ever Crisis, because in the original game, I think there was that weakness of lack of explanation or exploration of the discussion of mental health, and also it was turned into a strength in Rebirth, as you said, through like the Nibelheim stuff. And I think one of the things that dawned on me specifically was the question of like, what is compassion? What is compassion to, and how do you give people the compassion that they actually need, as opposed to your understanding of compassion? Because your understanding of compassion is a very different thing that maybe somebody else might need, you know? So I think that was sort of brought up very well in the context of Sephiroth and the Ever Crisis stuff, because you have this really interesting sort of prequel to the Edge of Creation scene happening, because I think we've gone over this enough to know, and I'm sure the audience knows, who's been following Ever Crisis and like really enjoying this stuff, has seen the reflective aspect of Rodin and Sephiroth's relationship and what he's teaching him in that moment as to what we eventually see, which the developers are making that connection very clearly for us just with what they show at the end. I think that this sort of approach from the emotional side is what is going to inevitably make and define the re-trilogy. And this is something I think everyone's also just been saying in chat, and ever since the Ever Crisis stuff has come out, is that we need this stuff in Rebirth. And you're gonna get it, I feel like this is actually just them demonstrating what this is, like you said, what this is all leading to, what this is all going to be about. So I think that Ever Crisis and the Sephiroth stuff is very interesting, because not only is it sort of humanizing Sephiroth and making him a more interesting villain, it's bringing to light more of what the discussion is that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going into. I also feel like one of the reasons why I like it so much, and I think we've discussed this a little bit too, is it feels like Ever Crisis is taking full advantage of what the compilation should have taken advantage of, which is the fact that there are so many pieces of Final Fantasy VII that make it what it is thematically, that it should be properly explored in other characters in an emotional and thoughtful way. I think that Rodin is a good example of that, where he's a completely new character and a perfect reflection of Sephiroth, to be able to have that bounce with them. I also think that Glenn and Lucia, I think I can't pronounce that name, but the other characters of Ever Crisis have also been very strong, and also been very, like, I think it's really funny to see like the pivot on everybody with Glenn right now, who knows, is that we were like, why is this useless character here? And now it's fully understood. Like, we fully understand his role in that. I also think that there's some stuff that they've hinted at that people aren't catching, that make it feel like what Ever Crisis is exploring is a lot of cut content. And this is purely speculation on my part, but it feels very much like Ever Crisis is very much exploring a lot of what could have been parts of Crisis Core initially, or at least things that were thought about initially, especially with where we're going with Angeal, and him being sort of introduced in the story. If you look back on the final chapter of this Sephiroth story that we just got, is that he's talking about what a hero is, and now we're going back into that discussion, which is a huge part of Crisis Core. Just as a FYI to people who don't know, that's like the discussion of that game, and having it be brought up by Sephiroth and him using that along with what Rodin's sort of discussion has brought up to him, and now getting this new Angeal chapter is very interesting. I also think that bringing the Buster Sword in is going to be a very interesting thing to explore from Sephiroth's perspective. I think that that's actually like the stuff that I'm the most interested in hearing about, because I think, as I've discussed in the Max podcast with you and just privately in other ways, I think that the Buster Sword will become and you've also had a lot of very interesting thoughts about the Buster Sword that I think and like what that will look like in Rebirth and in the future. I think all of that will be in play. I think that they're going to start introducing that to the audience through this new chapter with Angeal. So I think that they're definitely refocusing the audience's attention on where the attention should be, which is the emotional part of the story with the characters. The Sephiroth development is feeding right into that and giving us a more interesting character. We're getting a better look at compilation stuff like Crisis Core through this as well, and they're doing it in the same way, where it's all gonna emotionally resonate. So I couldn't be happier with Ever Crisis. I think that it's a very solid inclusion in every possible way, and I think it will eventually come into play with, you know, the story that we're getting in the main titles. I think that there are plenty of ways to explore the same discussion in that and not have it overlap or be like redundant. I'm excited to see how they do that. I think I answered the question.
You did.
I think so.
You did. So also, I think it would be good to just get kind of a general sense of what you think is happening with a few of the key points that are hotly discussed. So,
meaning,
what is your interpretation?
The Sephiroth conflict?
What is your interpretation of? What is your interpretation of the whispers in Rebirth and what they mean? And has that changed at all for you? It's changed a little bit for me recently, so.
I think that it's difficult, and this is one of those things. I think that is an important question to talk about. I'm not entirely sure myself right now. In a very, I don't feel like I have a very solid truth about what they are. I do think that they play into the game in the way that everyone has talked about it as a function, meaning that we have white whispers that are sort of a part of fate of the planet, the way that the game is explaining them now, as opposed to the black whispers, which are very defined at the very end of Rebirth as only a part of Sephiroth, not a part of the fate of the planet. But that kind of logic does not satisfy, because we're missing the most important part of why that matters, which is the emotional resonance of their piece in this puzzle. Is like, why are they there? And I think that question will be answered. I just am not exactly sure of that now. So we can solve a little bit of this easily because we've already talked about it to death, and it's something that we caught thematically a long time ago, which is Lifestream White and Black. We have white whispers that are clearly to represent Aerith, and we have Sephiroth, who very clearly represent the black whispers. We also have the entire ending of Rebirth or Remake that also very much solidifies some of the language to discuss this, because for instance, like the world that is created when Aerith returns for the final fight with Sephiroth creates the water surface, which is a big Loveless thing. But the thing that I think caught in the very opening, when we saw the box art for the first time, is that there's little pools of water that Sephiroth is standing on, and that's very reminiscent of what we see with Aerith in the final fight. But the funny thing about this and why this is so important is because it contrasts exactly what we know happened in Remake, whereas you defeat the Whisper Harbinger, a light engulfs you, and the scenario changes, and there's just a giant pool of water, and it's filled to the brim, and it's like an ocean. You're standing on an ocean. But now when Aerith is showing up, it's only pieces of water. And it's like clearly that, and I rewatched the scene several times recently, it's very clearly her world taking over the world that Sephiroth and Cloud were standing in initially.
Absolutely.
So once she emerges, is that these are two separate worlds, clearly represented by two separate whispers. Right. So that also elaborates. But the thing is that Aerith's presence is dwindling. And that's also something that is very clear in the game's sort of language, because at first, when we first see the white and black whispers in the Tifa sort of segment, the live stream segment, is that she says that the white whispers are winning. By the end of the game, that is not the case. It's very even. And now it feels like we're entering into the other sort of section of this game, which is very, and this is why Sephiroth is like laughing at the end, why it's like, okay, Aerith is showing up here to save Cloud this time, but is this something that is going to be able to be done again? And is more pressure going to be put on him to sort of, you know, deal with this himself in the future? And I feel like that's very heavily alluded to by just the state that we leave Cloud in. So the potential outcome of the worlds was always my sort of takeaway from the whispers, the new whispers, is that the potential reality that they create, that Aerith is fighting for, is represented by the white whispers, and the potential reality that could be born out of Sephiroth's dream is the black whispers. And they're both dreams, and we've talked about this endlessly too, with the Edge of Creation, the universe of death, and the universe that is about to be born. All of those things are still in play the way that we've talked about them. They just have a wider variety of context. As far as any deeper into it and how that happened or what's happening, like when did this happen? It could have happened at the end of Remake. That's sort of where my mind leans on the most. Like, I don't think that the whispers, it seems like the whispers were a function of the planet. I'm not 100% sold on that. It could very easily still be Genova's control that bore the white whispers first, and now they are being controlled separately by Aerith and Sephiroth, which gives them their color distinction. I think that that's as far as I've gone with that thought so far.
When I first, played the game, I it felt like, well, one, with Remake, there was all these little things about the whispers that had Sephiroth adjacent imagery, right? Like we talked about how why are the reunion clones robed, and these are robed. The whispers are robed. There was a lot of imagery where we would hear Sephiroth's voice. Well, there was one incident where Sephiroth's voice literally came from a whisper's mouth. Standing over
about
Cloud.
Dreams.
About dreams, yeah. Very sultry, and then the Whisper Harbinger, and then the three arbiters having that the Virdai, Rubrum, and Croseo being analogs to Kadaj, Laz, and Yazoo. There's all this stuff that kind of pointed to a relationship, and so I sort of thought, okay, maybe they're just Sephiroth the whole time. And then as I played the game the first time, I was like, okay, yeah, it's kind of saying that. And then, but these white whispers they seem to be something different. So it just really seemed like, and I still think, like, from a mechanical standpoint, white is Aerith, and her, maybe the Holy's implemented control on, on the live stream, and the black ones are Sephiroth, and Jenova corrupting them. But I mentioned this on the last episode, and I've been mentioning it for a couple of episodes now, but the thing that really stood out to me upon re-examination of the murals in the in chapter 13 is that all of the Cetra have the robe. They have the robe. The Cetra are the source of the robe. And even the reunion clones have a perverted, and corrupted variant of that robe. And I even think still that the symbol on the back is meant to represent a corruption of the original logo of Final Fantasy VII, the 7-stroke logo. And so I think quite literally the whispers are the Cetra in the live stream. They're the souls of the Cetra, and that the black ones are representative of the cycle of corruption that Genova brought to them, and I think that holy is the reaction or the response. I see Aerith as this as the I do see this as sort of a reverse chess scenario where Black had the first move, you know, and even though, like, you know, on a timeline in the OG, it seems like the opposite of that, you know, like Aerith is praying, and then stabby stab, and then meteor in the sky. I think that the way that, you know, time is treated, you know, in the live stream, in this place sort of it's represented as a place where time is out of joint, you know, so it's already given this very vague, you know, temporal or causal relationship with things that are happening on the top layer, you know, on the Beagle layer. And so I do think that, like, the opening move is still Sephiroth doing something to corrupt, you know, and we see that represented metaphysically in the singularity when he absorbs the whispers and then starts throwing them at shit and at the end of Remake. And I think that what happens with when the white whispers are sort of, you know, born, is that's happening in, you know, with Omni Aerith and whatever she's done, sort of, you know, in that space after life, you know, she's sort of reversing the corruption, or she is getting, you know, she's finding souls in the live stream that are uncorrupted or sympathetic to her, you know, her cause, etc., that heard her prayer. So I do think that that's kind of what they're being set up, and I think there's, like, room for a really interesting story there, because you know, one of the things that we always hear when we're, like, looking on various forums is, like, what are things we'd love to see? It's like, oh, we'd love to see a spin-off chapter or a spin-off anime about the Cetra. In fact, we've had friends try and make fan ones and then get shut down by Square Enix, you know? Like, people want to know about the history of that, because it seems like there's a really interesting story, you know, that happened 2,000 years ago. And so I think this is an opportunity for them to tell that, and they are telling it. They have told a lot of story about the history of the world we're in Rebirth. Like, they're talking about how, you know, the Cetra had this really xenophobic response to the Gi tribe, probably because they had, you know, one alien ruined it for all the other aliens. Basically, one outsider.
Yeah, they're like, you just had to go ahead and steal a pair from the Cetra, and now their whole entire race is.
Yeah, you're not allowed in there. You're not allowed in there.
Purgatory for the rest of eternity.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much how that stuff starts.
And that's another thing. Like, something I always forget about. I don't always forget about it. I always remember too. But it's gives me a lot of confidence about 7R compared to maybe some other, you know, recent series entries. Is that there actually usually is context, right? So you hear that one line about, you hear Gina talk say that one thing about the Cetra not always being tolerant, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. I've always had this kind of headcanon that maybe there's more to it, but then you, like, start looking at all the other stuff, and you see the story told on both murals. And by both murals, I mean both picturing the past mural, so the one in Remake's room, and then also the one in the Temple of the Ancients.
Yeah, the Cetra literally positioned the same way, creating the white materia world.
Yeah.
Like summoning the summons, and then you have the Gi also pictured in the same posing.
Yeah,
like the same amount of Gi also creating the black materia. And this is something that I think you and I have, like, and we keep arriving at the same thought again and again over, like, different times, because it's it's so literal. It's and the game is trying to always be so literal in its explanation. I think Phil said like the usually the simplest answer is the answer, and is that there is not any distinguishing factors between that. Like everything has an opposite in the story. Literally every function has an opposite. So in the sense of that imagery also being a reference to the remake, etc., the Gi and the Black Materia, that all makes sense. And I also the hooded thing that you just referenced, which is genius, I think, and is very much true. And even in the entire mural with the color separation that we've also discussed off stream, which is that the first time you go through the Temple of the Ancients, the mural's lit up a certain way with green, and then on the way out it's red. So it's clearly meant to be the same story. It's just about the chicken and the egg discussion. Is what came first, what started this all first. And I think that this is one of the interesting things that's sort of being brought up in a very, because it's actually a thought that I've had while writing, so maybe this is slight projection, but the idea of the spiral and the reason why this sort of weird sort of reoccurring image in Rebirth has been a fixation of mine is that, and for people who don't know what I'm talking about, is that several pieces of imagery suggest that there is a center, or that things are spiraling to create some just one world, which is sort of being suggested by Sephiroth, is that there is these worlds, and then there is the planet, like the singularity, the one that it will arrive to in the end. Cosmo Canyon also has this imagery in its logo that it's spiraling towards the center. I don't think that there is a center. I actually think that that's going to be the reveal, is that Sephiroth is trying to manifest the oneness of this, to give an answer, to give that sort of place meaning and definition. But I actually think that eternity is actually nothingness and kind of just ongoing and never ceasing in that pursuit. I think that that's why it doesn't, the Cetra are like, that doesn't exist. Like, what you're talking about is not real. And Sephiroth is saying that I will make it real. Like, I will manifest this eternity. But this is what makes the lore of Final Fantasy VII so interesting, is that plays into what we just were talking about. Is that the thing that's so confusing about looking at the lore of this game now is that you don't know what started what, and what is real and what isn't. Is Jenova just born out of the goddess, or is she just emulating the goddess that we've seen in the mural coming down from the sky, and then she like kills them, and like, you know, the whole story of the Jenova War sort of begins? Or is it that it was just her at the beginning, and is this all like, is she meant to be like the god of this world? It's such an interesting discussion that they're bringing to the table, and I gotta admit, it's very confusing intentionally, I feel like. So they've given it a lot of thought. It's just about knowing where to start. Like, what is the beginning and what is the end of this discussion is going to be a very interesting thing for me specifically to kind of go through. And I don't know if you've given that. You said initially that you feel like the Black live stream, or the Jenova part, was probably the first play when it came to the Black Road figures. Do you feel like that is how this all started, or do you feel like it's only the start of this whole timeline nonsense?
No, I think it's...
I'm asking a hard question, I feel like, because I don't know the answer of it myself.
So I do think that the quote-unquote timeline nonsense, I think the best way that I've found to conceptualize the timeline nonsense is that, you know, the live stream was fractured as a result of actions performed at the end of Remake. I don't think there's a necessary moral value to that. I don't think it's bad to break fate, but I do know that it seems like the reason that there was an opportunity for quote unquote timeline nonsense to start occurring is because of events at the end of Remake. But I think the reason that things continue to alter is in fact because of Zach, right? We get confirmation that Zach is making these choices and it has an impact on how the live stream is branching. And that's in the Ultimania. It's and so I think some of the visual language maybe misses a few cues on accident there, but I do think that what we're seeing is this relationship between choice, hopes, dreams, honors, despair, and the way that it affects, our memory of things. However, like from a mechanical standpoint, the beginning of the black versus white whisper conflict started when Sephiroth absorbed those black whispers and the meteor at the end of Remake. I think that was the catalyzing event for him to be, interfering at the way and manifesting these black whispers in the way that he is. So I do think that is the beginning of the corruption. I think he's the opening piece in the battle for Cloud's soul. He's making the opening move in the battle for Cloud's, identity and soul between him and Aerith, and then ultimately the surface dwellers too, like Tifa and all the characters. I do think that's happened because Sephiroth absorbed the meteor. So that's the opening move for that. Mm-hmm. Timeline being broken, though, I think that is, that's a collaboration of things. I think it's...
It just all kind of happened.
It all kind of happened, yeah. Yeah.
I do want, because you did bring up so many interesting things in the introductory to this section.
Yeah.
And one of the things that kind of, as comparisons that you kind of helped me realize in this moment is that one of the things that we have been introduced to recently is sort of the soldier degradation element of Rebirth, to sort of explain what is going on with like Cloud as an excuse for like what is ultimately happening because of other things that we know from the original game. One of the things that was also kind of brought up, it's a discussion that sort of comes up through Queen's Blood, is that there is an illness that plagues Queen's Blood players. The curse of I can't remember the creator's name, but it's a curse, and people die once they get to a certain point. This is also a soldier degradation alluding to, but mainly because of the ties with Genova and Queen's Blood. It's probably more to the point the fate of Soldier, which is a loveless connection, which is also to do with Genova and, Black Cloak figures and succumbing to that. One of the things that I think is interesting about the parallel between, we'll just say, the Emerald Witch and the Queen, is that, and just the white and black, and sort of is a perception of death, like what death means, where I thought it was very interesting, and this is what separates all of the, opposites, is that it's sort of like your perception of things, which goes back to your perception of compassion, is that the perception of death, I find it funny, as being illustrated as a curse, is that when you die, it's a curse. Geostigma is a curse on those dead, because they are plagued with fears and all this other stuff. Whereas death in the other sense is just death. It just ends, So I think that that's also an interesting. I know that this is sort of a derailing of what we were just talking about, but I find that that's an interesting thing that Rebirth continues to be illustrating, is that there are these two perceptions, and they're illustrating it again through Queen's Blood, and obviously the Gi and everything else that we talked about. I do find it almost, and I think you find it, the discussion of like where this all begins, as far as like the corruption and all this other stuff. I agree that the absorption of Meteor seems to be the kickoff in the context that you gave. But as far as the initial start of all of this, it's still just like a myriad of like different people becoming involved, and like how that all goes down is, I think, going to be a much harder discussion to get into, just because there's still so many pieces that we're not as familiar with. I think the mural is the beginning discussion of trying to break that down to us as the audience who doesn't know the full picture, and will require a lot more time and attention than I think both of us have. We've already given it enough. So, yeah, it's an interesting discussion to have, I think, either way. So,
okay. Well, you know how we are, right? We're a mess. And so I'm going to shift gears.
I'm a mess. You are fine.
Incredibly. And I'm going to ask you a wild question. What is Final Fantasy VII about?
You ask every guest this question now? Is this a we're trying to get to the bottom of something question? It's a good question.
Don't question my methods.
I'm trying to figure out the angle. I'm trying to figure out
Q&A is at the end.
The point of view. I will. That's true. What is Final Fantasy VII about? It's about a lot of things. I think that it's about definitely an environmentalist message.
Okay.
Like about the planet. It's about like how we treat the planet. I think that is the biggest resonating factor of the original for me. As far as like the big overall thing, but it's also just about how life is a good way of saying it, Joshy Poo. But I think it's about just in general how we take care of things, how like things need to be taken care of, like people need to be taken care of. Like again, I hate to say it, but it feels very resonating to what we've been talking about, which is that there's a compassionate aspect to this. Is compassion, how we give compassion, how we treat things, how we take care of things, how we need to take care of ourselves, which again is a much bigger expanded discussion, I think, in Rebirth. And also just the sort of I wouldn't say irony, but like the entire game being about like trying to save the planet when at the end like none of our characters are alive at the very end of the game, which it's 500 years in the future, and how life kind of continues on with or without the answer to these questions, or the sort of resolution of these questions. Clearly there is resolution, but at the same time it's a question that spans way farther beyond our characters' sort of issues, but also it's the aspect of solving those things that may have contributed to the length of time in which the planet has been able to survive. So I think that that's usually where my mind goes when I think about what Final Fantasy VII is about. Is about like how maybe it's the drop of water making the ripple sort of go out sort of effect. But those are like in the immediate playing of the game, I'm way more just concerned about like the plot of like Cloud and his journey, and pretty much just his sort of mental health, I think, is where my mind also goes. I, again, having discussed sort of the angle of the original, it's very interpretive and on purpose, I think, and to its benefit. So I think I answered the question.
Yeah, that's fine. And one of the stock answers has always been life. That the theme of Final Fantasy VII is life. And so when you say life, that's like saying, the theme of telling a story is telling a story. Like, it is so broad. Yes. It's like, because you cannot, life inexplicably or inextricably connects to death. Death provides the scarcity that adds value to life. The finite nature of life is one of the primary topics when you're discussing life. When you're talking about the life of the planet, that's obviously, the environmental call to action. The nature of reality is only valuable because we can see it from the perspective of being
your attention
alive.
On these two. Yeah, these two things is that what you're saying is it's the conflict between life and death. I think if you're talking about, if I were to group like the compilation into that discussion, because I think that was something that I was very intent on with like Crisis Core. I think that it is that conflict between life and death and the meaning of those things to the characters, to us as like humanity, and like what we value. I think the word value is accurate, and you keep bringing that up. I think that that's a very specific to the question, to the pondering of life, not just life as a general sort of coverage.
Right.
Is the value of these things and what we place value in and how we value them or how we undervalue them and how we treat them despite that, which I think plugs back into the compassion thing. Also, knowing in Rebirth that like dreams are something that have physical manifestation very much goes back into this discussion of like, if enough people sort of plug in that perspective of their hopes and dreams, it can manifest, which is something that people say to individuals, which is that if you dream and you shoot for those dreams, I wonder who this sounds like.
Yeah.
That they will come true. I think that in the same sense, and I was thinking about this also, you're always such a well of inspiration when you start talking about sort of these things, because this came to my mind earlier, is that if dreams can also be physically manifested, so can fears, so can nightmares. Those things are also just as real and palpable in the world of Final Fantasy VII as dreams. So that is also something to consider, and also something that we also feed into. And those are also things that are very prevalent in the mental health discussion of Final Fantasy VII. Is that when the manifestation of these things becoming a reality by even how's the word, how we view life can also shape it, if that makes sense.
Sure. I agree. And I also think life does encapsulate what most of the developers have agreed is the sort of synopsis, the narrative core of the story. So theme and narrative core are distinct from each other. I think the narrative core is Cloud's identity, right? And a lot of that is where his life, which can be used, I think, synonymously with life experience, and often you hear those two phrases used interchangeably. You'll hear somebody say my life when what they mean is their life experience, because life is, a powerful English term. I think that during Cloud's life, when he's embracing it and he's experiencing his life, his inner journey, which is the narrative core, where he finds out who he really is, he embraces, the honest truth of himself, which is full of flaws, and then he makes choices, and he lets those choices define him instead of a self-concept, and so there's this call to action, and all of that can be contained within the container of the theme life. But I think Final Fantasy VII is about many things, and that's what's really good. So my follow-up question is actually for Rebirth. What do you think Rebirth is about?
I find it so interesting that because I think I've heard enough of other podcasts and sort of your thoughts on this that I find that your exploration of this discussion very interesting. That you're comparing and contrasting the original and Rebirth in this particular way. My answer to the question, I think, is, again, I think very distinctive to like Rebirth is what is compassion. Because I think that was the thing that immediately kicked off the game and is the through line from beginning to end. Because I think it was the very first game of Queen's Blood that I played where I was just like, how is this game doing this already? I started playing it and the guy is like, it's healthy to cry. And I'm thinking to myself, for an average gamer, you're gonna just think that that's just, this weird out of place character.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I was like, they're already doing it.
This is beautiful.
Immediately they just start putting bricks down, dude.
Yeah.
Like, and building the house in front of you. And it's all the way up until the end. And I think that is what I got really emotional by the end of the game. And I know that the music choice is still something that is contentious. But the use of Who Am I in the Sleeping Forest.
Oh, I love that.
The quintessential part of why I love Rebirth.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. That's getting clipped.
It's the matching of every part of the world's thematic building and the character mindset just completely intertwining. And then everything from that moment on, they're married to each other and they're inseparable. And the game has been telling you that they are inseparable, but there's never quite a moment where the game is meta enough to tell you that that's what's happening. It's just been kind of keeping them separate, or being able to be viewed separately. But in that moment, they are one thing. And there is not a single doubt in my mind that it's only because of the work that they do through the entire game, just only nailing home that point. So I think that it's compassion. Compassion is what Sephiroth tries to show Rosen before he kills him. It's the same thing that Sephiroth is trying to give Cloud at the edge of creation. It's the same thing that all of the characters are trying to do for Cloud when it's very clear that he's not well. It's the same thing that Barrett is trying to do for Dyne, and maybe failing to do. I think that every point goes back to, how do we do this in a way that is actually going to have an effect, which is also one of the things that makes it so interesting for the side discussions of the game, is that Rufus, without, having it be illustrated until the third game for sure, but for people who are familiar with the rest of the compilation, is that Rufus is also trying to do that. He is trying to do that through other channels. So the Turks also believe in that way of doing things. So every character is expressing how they want to take care of things and how they want to be compassionate to the things, and how do they treat the things that they care about. So you can't make up how fucking good like the language of this game is that it's so well thought out and so all in, like, it's all coming together in a really, really beautiful way in Rebirth. I think that answers. I know I keep saying that, but I just I know I'm ranting, but it's beautiful.
Love it. I love it. I agree. It is beautiful. There's a lot of beauty in that, and yeah, there are a lot of moments that really kind of wrecked me. From a compassion standpoint. Okay. Next question. Glenn.
What is
What's going
what is part
on?
3 going to be about?
What's going on with Glenn? Just explain Glenn.
Glenn is now become the representation of Sephiroth's understanding of compassion, and he's using his image, whether he's consciously using it or not, to also sort of, I guess the better way of saying it is that Glenn is the old representation of Sephiroth's idea of what compassion is. And so his utilization of a soldier who taught Sephiroth compassion and showed him his very first amount of compassion in Ever Crisis, adapted that to sort of be the image of like what he and along with them, assuming Angeal's perception of heroes and his idea of a hero and Glenn's idea of a hero, Sephiroth has kind of molded himself into that thing, or wanted to become that thing. So Glenn's a representation of compassion. He's a representation of a old world mentality. I think that is it. I don't want to say that it's, because it's very difficult to define this, whether Sephiroth is pretending to be Glenn in Rebirth because he's mocking him, or he is trying to realize, because in the very last scene where we see Glenn, where we find out that it's actually Sephiroth, is that he says that this is the promised land that we are trying to realize. So I think that genuinely Sephiroth is still trying to even achieve the world that Glenn has sort of given to Sephiroth. He's like, I'm trying to show everybody that level of compassion, just in the worst possible way. So to answer your question more directly, is Glenn is a piece of a bigger puzzle in the discussion of what is a hero, a bigger part of the discussion of how we will eventually get into the War of Beast, which is a loveless discussion, and is sort of the pin in the prequel discussion of how Sephiroth came to be Sephiroth. Does that sort of resonate?
I'm not grading you on this, by the way. I'm just letting you do your thing. But no, seriously, like, do you think there's something distinct? Okay, so we know that Sephiroth has these vague Genova abilities where, like, in the OG, he, like, appeared as Tifa by the Northern Crater, sort of, and he can just... So we do know that, like, there is some degree of him being able to, like, you know, shapeshift and appear as loved ones. However, we haven't quite seen that other than this. You know, we'll see him appearing in place of robes, but we haven't actually seen him, like, just straight up take the form of another person yet. There does seem to be some weird distinction with, like, the nature of his physical relationship with Glenn. Do you think there is something to that, or it's just that we're just gonna find out that Sephiroth can do that? Part of the reason I'm bringing that up is the dog. Okay, so this is sort of a crack theory. You know, Glenn has this dog that he got from Rosen named Refu. Refu has a star on his forehead, and it's a dark star.
I don't think that this is a crackpot theory at all. This is very much what's going to happen.
Rufus's dog is named Darkstar. Okay, so does some crazy Genova ass shit happen after Rufus shoots you know, Glenn in the back, and then Sephiroth gets involved, like absorbs his body or some shit? Or I mean, there does seem to be like some kind of mechanical difference. The other thing too, by the way, with Refu, I do want to recognize is that it does seem to translate to reflect, and that star on the forehead is kind of gem coated, and Carbuncle has a gem on his forehead and is affiliated with the reflect spell, you know, so it is kind of carbuncle coated too. But what do you think? I mean, like, do you think that like we're gonna see some kind of explanation for why?
Yeah,
physically. Okay, you do. So just yes is the answer to that
I
question.
do think that. Yeah, I do. Right. I think that there is, and I think you. The reason why I'm so fascinated with your questions is because, and it is yes, partially I feel graded, but that's just every time we talk about theories in the public space. But the other thing is that I find it interesting because I want to know what you're thinking most of the time. So that's why I'm so fascinated with these questions, because they're very specific. So meaning that you've thought about them. So I would be interested to hear your response to this question too. But my answer to it is that back to the everything is a reflection of one another thing is that Glenn is a part of Sephiroth in the same way that every other person is a part of one another in terms of like the live stream. So I think that it's just being more heavily reflected in Rebirth as far as how people are connected to one another. I think that the idea of consciousness living on inside of others is a very important thing that is going to become a much larger discussion in 3, especially in regards to like Aerith. But I think that Sephiroth manifesting this sort of part of Glenn is both because Glenn is a part of Sephiroth. We're learning about the people that are like really tied to him in a way that is going to become relevant very like prominently, because we know that these are prominent features of our main character. This is the discussion that the main character is bringing to the table. And what Rebirth is saying is that no one's any different. Like, we're treating everyone with the same lens, that everyone else, like a perfect example is Tifa's scene also alludes to this, is in the live stream sequence. We see when Tifa falls into the reactor that the perspective of that scene playing out is from Claude's perspective, but that Tifa is there. Those things are intrinsically the same overall. Is that his perception is also a part of Tifa, and even with or without Cloud being in the live stream, that memories and other people's perceptions of ourselves and our perception of ourselves, all of them are real and have physical presence in the live stream, and also simultaneously are a part of ourselves. Sephiroth is no different. Sephiroth is the person that he is because of Genesis, because of Angeal, because of Glenn, and because of like all of those people that were involved with his life at a younger age, like and that has manifested the reality that he's trying to create. So yes, I do think that there is a specific reason for him picking that. I also think that there's like a story reason because of his connection with Rufus and the method of Rufus also trying to manifest his reality, the reality that he wants to see in the world, is very present in the reason why he probably ends up killing Glenn in that flashback, is because ultimately they're trying to achieve things on a different level or in a different way. And that conflict is going to become very relevant in part 3. That's what the entire War of Beasts is going to be about, is like those ways of showing compassion are not going to line up. So, and somebody also, I just really quickly wanted to mention, somebody in chat was like, yeah, that's like Sephiroth is trying to create the Promised Land. But you got to think back to the original game is that the Promised Land is not something that we ever see.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be undefined. So that is also just feeding into the argument for me that the place that Sephiroth is trying to manifest does not exist yet. And probably is, and that's why you're hearing like the souls of thousands of souls screaming, and why probably Sephiroth is really excited about this and Cloud is not, is because Sephiroth is just trying to demonstrate that they're alive, you know, that these souls exist and they're all together now. It doesn't matter whether or not they're happy about it or not. It's the fact that they all just lived or are surviving in some way and not just being, you know, torn apart. Anyway, I do think that Glenn is a much more interesting character because of Ever Crisis. I really do hope that they do explore that more, and I'm sure that we will in Wutai in Part 3 in its own way with like new cutscenes, you know, a new story, a new side of the story that we haven't seen yet. So,
follow up. Explain to the audience what is happening in Wutai, what is happening with Avalanche, what is happening with like the SRC, and how does Sephiroth factor into that? And an extreme leading follow-up question, is that the War of the Beasts?
it's the start of something like that, yeah. But to very like in a nutshell, what is happening in what's been starting as a discussion in Remake is sort of a recreation of and a sort of spotlight on Before Crisis lore. Is what we have come to know through Before Crisis is that Rufus created Avalanche and was a major funder of how Avalanche was even able to stand up on its own 2 feet. The base of which was founded in Wutai, because Wutai was an enemy of Shinra, and Avalanche was clearly a going to become a sort of player in that conflict. But it's also so it was started by Rufus, founded in Wutai, and then through that sort of backdoor conflict, Rufus was sort of trying to overthrow his father and kind of take the presidency for himself. It doesn't seem like that's the case anymore. It seems like this has always been something that Shinra has been doing, is sort of kind of conducting conflict in this way to sort of drum up their own means to an end, meaning that the conflict with Wutai is essentially all controlled by Shinra. It's controlled by Rufus Shinra. The conflict with Avalanche was started by Rufus, meaning that the conflict between Avalanche and Shinra is also a lie at its core to sort of manifest something. But this, as much as this sounds horrible and like, oh my god, this is a tragedy, it's more or less Rufus's way of trying to sort of kite the world into resolution and peace in a way that is in creation of a lie, though, which I think is where we kind of end up in a situation with Glenn and Rufus in Rebirth, is that as we know, Glenn is leading sort of a new rebellion kind of created with him and Viceroy Saruf, which is created, sort of mentioned in the sort of openings in the late stages of the chapter for Ever Crisis, is that you can see Glenn has become disillusioned with the idea of what a soldier represents, which is very similar to Genesis and sort of Zack's disillusionment with that ideal of what a soldier represents, because it's actually just they're pawns in a game and they don't want to be that. So Glenn breaks off. As we know, he becomes sort of this head figure in Wutai that is also trying to sort of bring about this revolutionary change in their government, with this Viceroy Saruf character who is also Rufus. And so what seems to have happened, and most likely is the reason for Glenn's death, in my perception, this is still not founded, we still don't know this for certain, but the most likely scenario is that Glenn finds out that Viceroy Saruf is Rufus. And the reason why Rufus kills Glenn is because Glenn, again, this is all hypothetical, is that essentially why Glenn would say something about this is because he's a pawn. Again, he finds out that he is a pawn for change, for a means to an end, and that they're just chess pieces being moved around. So the thing about this is, and that what's so interesting about it is because it plugs directly back into Wutai, in the sense that all of this is happening in modern day Wutai, and that truth has not been revealed yet. But also it ties back in emotionally to Yuffie's character, who believes very strongly in the change that's being invoked by this new government, and that the government will be decided after this war is ended. Now, the thing that is interesting about the War of Beasts is that it's a conflict between what is represented in the mural, essentially, is the Cetra and humanity. But it's also alluded to that the soldiers that are depicted in the mural are pretty much the soldiers in Loveless, which are pretty much soldiers as we know them in the definition of Final Fantasy VII. So characters like Zack, characters like Cloud. So essentially what we've already been seeing reoccurring over time. And as Glenn describes it, that this is a war that will sort of recreate the world, which is what the War of Beasts is it's a restart. It's a cycle of events, and that this conflict will bring about sort of the beginning of a cycle, a Ragnarok type event. So it's both, like I said at the beginning, a retelling of Before Crisis lore. It's a adaptation of that, a continuation of that at the same time. It's a true requel of that in that sense, and also is an expansion of Crisis Core's sort of underlying lore, all to sort of tell this newer, bigger story. And so it's all going to be very interesting. I do feel like it's going to manifest in a conflict between Wutai and Shinra, which will probably, by the time that we get to Wutai, will probably unearth the truth, and Wutai will actively, most likely, bring about like change. Like that movement will turn into something else, and not be controlled by Rufus, and will most likely be a situation where Rufus loses that control because of our involvement, and then we will probably have the attack on Midgar. That's sort of how that seems to go in my head so far.
I love it. I wonder if Godo knows the truth.
Godo is locked up because he knows the truth.
Yep.
That's the only answer. And one of the things that I've talked to Clark about privately is that I genuinely think that the reason why Sonon is in Intergrade and that Yuffie Kitsuragi is given that mission is because Godo sent Yuffie away to save her, which is, there's no reason that Yuffie would be in charge of Sonon. There's no reason that she would go unless she was in charge, or that she would have a better prospect by going to Midgar. So the only logical reason that Yuffie was sent to Midgar to find this other materia with somebody way more experienced is to protect her. So the person that Yuffie hates, her father, is the person who actually saved her. And the reason why Sonon is so conflicted with what she says is because she doesn't know that the only reason she's even probably alive is because this happened. So she's just as disillusioned as the other characters in the story, and this is something that I've talked to Clark about as well off camera, is that the idea is that Rebirth is about sort of the deconstruction, the shattering of the mirror of our characters. And the main conflict for our characters coming up is that, for Cloud specifically, is that he is nothing, that he's worthless, and his perception of reality is wrong. And that's what causes this. So it's both shattering of the mirror, the realization that you are nothing, and then the realization that, the rebuild of that character. So Yuffie will go through that same transformation. Is she will realize that her perception is a lie, that the new government is a farce, that her father is actually a hero in her eyes and is actually the one who's in the right, and she will feel like a loser. She's gonna feel like nothing. She's gonna feel powerless. And then you're gonna have the arc of her character be like, I can overcome, my fear of like Nero, like the Nero fear, that sense of death, the idea of challenge. Yeah. Anyway, I think we get it.
No, you did good. Okay, so Rocket Town.
The area I know the least about.
So, I'm ultra curious how they're gonna do space and Rocket Town now.
That's a really good
even
question.
More so, because there's the huge materia thing, and then there's Rocket Town. What? Okay. I think early on in, a lot of our theory crafting, as soon as Remake hit the streets, we're like, okay, let's look at the whole ass compilation. Because there were compilation references, and it was clear that, a 2016 or 2018 viral interview was mistranslated that said that the compilation wasn't going to be part of the Remake project. That was a total falsehood, but it was viral, and so most people thought it, and I even kind of had a vague kind of thinking that that's what would happen, and then, a few trailers in, I was like, oh, okay, so never mind. That is absolutely not true. There's a ton of compilation stuff going on. So we all got in on this compilation stuff. And we looked at the best compilation title that there is, Dirge of Cerberus. And we looked at the Omega weapon, and we looked at this idea of a universal life stream, and, maybe finding this Omega level weapon type space shenanigans as a ultimate end game. I will say that I've kind of moved a little bit away from that as even being necessary, because we've got this kind of the psycho-spiritual space of everything really seems to be the primary mechanic at play, and it doesn't seem to have as many boundaries in terms of space goes. But we still have this Rocket Town. We still have this thing. What are ways, do you have any thoughts about that? And you can say no, be like, you know what? No, I don't care about space.
I have a direct correlation to be made with so I do think that there's something interesting happening with the way that worlds are used in Rebirth, in the sense that one of the discussions that has been really interesting about Dirge is that there's the life stream hopping, the planet's death being sort of the beginning of another, and that is a conversation that I've been really interested in seeing reapproached. In like, that was one of the very first things that I thought would be interesting as remake, sort of in the remake story, to see it sort of come to light in a bigger way. And that was one of my like very first theories. That was the basis of it, I think. But as far as the way that Rebirth has become so introspective to the life stream that is on the planet, it's almost taken a lot of that away. But at the same time, I feel like there is something still going on in this bigger picture, because it actually makes that a more fascinating thing to explore. Is like, and also when Sephiroth is like flying through the multiple worlds segment, if you look through the like sort of white giant like light that they're sort of being propelled through, it looks like they're passing stars. It looks like they're in space. So and even in my first playthrough, I was like, that they literally look like they're just jettisoning themselves through space. I would be really interested to hear or see somebody's discussion about that part's play in the rest of the story. So I don't have many thoughts about it, but it's one of those things where it's only because there hasn't been something that has particularly grabbed me yet in the discussion. But there's also, I don't want to say Final Fantasy IX vibes, but there is sort of the sky is the ground and the ground is the sky sort of thing, where there's like two worlds that are connected via, this thing. And now we have this tear in space, which could be very interesting to explore. I don't think that I don't know how that would play out. I almost feel like in this realm, I feel like I'm going too far out by saying if you were to go explore space, it would be with the tear in the sky. But how that is going to play out, and even the shooting of meteor is something that I don't know how that will play out. All of those beats feel like they're going to be very heavily altered to some degree, the context of those.
I agree. I do see that as like, okay, we're going to see some surprising stuff in this regards.
Right.
Yeah.
So to your general question, but like, do you have any thoughts in regards to this?
I really, that's the thing. It's like, I feel like, no, you actually nailed why I asked the question, which is that the meteor being in the sky is so iconic that it feels like there's a deep obligation to show it. But also there's the tear in the sky that Cloud can see, which seems to be emblematic of his internal mental struggle. So does that mean he's gonna see the tear and a meteor? Is the meteor actually gonna show? I mean, it's on all the covers. They can't not show the damn meteor. Like, they can't. Like, it would be bonkers, right? So does that mean that we don't see the meteor until Cloud goes through the live stream sequence? Like, gets a bow tie on that? Or does Cloud see the tear and the meteor, and then everybody else just sees the meteor? Everybody's got to see that meteor, right? And so
you have one thing to this too, by the way, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's something I kept forgetting to mention, is that the other thing that makes this almost too juicy but also too speculative to let go is the fact that Stamp's creation is a part of the space program. Okay, so and that is like such your thing.
Well, okay, it is. And look, I hate to peel back on that. Look, I think my friends and some of chat and my longtime fans know that I am very sarcastic And it is really hard to tell sometimes when I'm being sarcastic or not. But one of my favorite things to bring up is the fact that Stamp's creation. So where this comes from, the main reason I bring it up is because it's really ridiculous. Okay, that's the real reason. So peel back the curtain. I thought it was hilarious when I read this. So in the Materials Ultimania Plus, one of the little interview blurbs says that perhaps Stamp was, or actually no, I'm sorry, it wasn't the Materials Plus. It was actually in it was one of the retrospective series that they put out on the blog. Toriyama answered, rumor has it that Stamp was drawn by Palmer when the space program was canceled, is what he said. And Toriyama, okay. Toriyama is like, I'm not saying he doesn't know the full plot. I'm not saying that he's like an unreliable person, but if there were ever somebody that you could reliably say might say something silly or cheeky, it might be Toriyama, right? So I don't want to say take that with a grain of salt. Don't dismiss it entirely as if it's not true. But I would say that if it ended up not being true at all, I would be like, okay, that's Toriyama being Baby Seal-esque in his delivery of a thing. Like super ironical, right? So with that out of the way, it is something that does, like, it's one more thing that you're like, oh man. Because you're looking at the stamps and you're looking at these different stamps and nobody's going to space. Nobody's going to space in the Terrierverse. That shit's not lasting to space time. We don't even know if there's a rocket town in the Terrierverse. All we see is Midgar. Like, we don't know. So like those all seem real, like disjointed versions of Midgar. Like, we have no proof that there's anything but like a Dark City style like dome with like a fake background for, like a Truman Show-esque, reality for the dream worlds in the interlude. Like, we have no fucking idea. But it is this weird coincidence that, like, oh, Toriyama said that shit about there not being, about like space program getting cut, and then him drawing different doodles based on his mood, as a result. So yeah, there is that thing where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe the only world that gets a space program is the one that's lived long enough to see it, But I don't know.
And to your point, though, or to the point of like giving this more weight, is that Stamp does use imagery that is heavily discussed in other Ultimanias about the use of the star. The word star and planet is very interchangeable in the Final Fantasy VII sort of universe, where stars are usually alluding to worlds or planets. And it's very much used in that way in Rebirth, but to distinguish between realities that are worlds that are all sort of conjoined / connected via this world's life stream, this planet's life stream. But in the past, and even in Dirge of Cerberus, we know that like the discussion of stars is what like are said that the Cetra travel between. Now in retrospect, and also confirmed in Rebirth, that's less of a theoretical sort of discussion because we weren't really sure how that worked. The same thing is said by the Gi, is that their star died, and like they sort of wound up on the planet in that way, which is still fucking crazy for me to even try and like wrap my mind around. I still need to like really think about that part. It feels almost, it would be almost disingenuous to make the connection between Stamp and space, and not have some sort of follow through with that discussion in a more interesting way. And I almost feel like there isn't enough of a discussion about that yet, because even in our discussion of Meteor hasn't really sort of blossomed into what it needs to be, I think, as far as its role in part 3 in regard to the way that we see Meteor depicted at the end of Remake and at the end of Rebirth. The fact that literally Sephiroth absorbs another fucking meteor in, like, before the Temple of the Ancients sequence. Like, what is all of that? That is... And also the tear in the Sephiroth Reborn fight. Also having a meteor coming through that in the Zack fight. In the mural in the Temple of the Ancients with multiple meteors being depicted. It's a fucking free-for-all when it comes to this discussion. So I think that that's ultimately where the sky representation and the thematic discussion of the sky should tie up realistically, because it is connected to this sort of alien Genova. It's connected to the rest of the plot that we know of Final Fantasy VII with Rocket Town, and that is involved in some way. So I think that there is something really important that you're touching on in this question. I just don't know if we have enough of the pieces yet.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting.
100%. Were there any moments in like the main narrative that like stood out to you as like this is really where the story's heading, like that felt like really like kind of gotcha or emblematic of part 3 for you?
A lot of the Temple of the Ancient stuff. Pretty much from then on to the rest of the to the end of the game. I think even like going off of like the enemy choice is that you started getting these sort of bigger enemies with these different sort of mechanics that were like more about damaging them or like freeing them up for damage. I think that felt very much like this feels like we're transitioning out of part 2 combat into what they want to be playing with, sort of in the way that Vice feels like a Rebirth fight now, more than it feels like a remake fight. With the difference in mechanics is it really felt like if we were to be playing all of these games in succession, it feels like part 3's end game feels like the lead into the mechanics of part 3 a little bit. Definitely gonna be and don't get me started, I fucking hated some of those fights. I fucking hated the giant tortoise fight. I fucking hated it. But I was seeing in between my hatred glimpses of these are bigger enemies. We are going to be fighting weapons upcoming. I would be more inclined to feel like these are gonna be happening more often.
I'm gonna make you hate that fight even more. You want to know why? Did you know that was supposed to be our tank Ceratops? That tortoise fight, you know, in the Temple of the Ancients where it just shoots fireballs at you? It's got the same name in Japanese as the tank Ceratops. I know. I know. Where's the Ceratops? Where's the where?
Why?
What? I know.
Why did you tell me this? Why would you injure me in this? Why would you betray me like this? This is the only thing I never wanted to know anything about. Now that I know.
Wait, why would be a robot dino be in the temple? Though that's a great question. Why would it be anywhere though? I mean, and yeah, Cetron weapons are high tech too. It
makes a lot more sense with the way that the mechanics of that fight work.
Yeah.
That it would be more aligned with a giant robot Triceratops.
Yeah.
Than.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So yeah, I do hate that fight more now.
You're welcome.
Mission complete. I hate it. I think to answer your question more directly is that it's the storytelling from that point to the end, because you have a lot of really interesting, again, sort of what I touched upon earlier, is a lot of the world mechanics are melding very much with the main character's perception of reality. And I think that line gets really interesting to contemplate, and I feel like the game earns the moment when everything is sort of coming together at the end with the whispers, and like his perception of reality is very muddied, and everything at the end of that game feels very overlapped in terms of both the meta discussion, the thematic discussion, and the reality of the game's sort of world, and the mental tragedy of what is happening to Cloud is all very aligned. So I think all of that felt very like we're going into the future with this. This is the heart of the story being carried right on into the next game, which feels very less like remakes, sort of like, where are we gonna leave off? Like, what is Zach's role? Like, no, I feel very certain. I also feel very certain about the text at the end, which we've talked about, which is the Loveless discussion. I feel like the Loveless play also would be a very emblematic thing of Part 3, in the way that two worlds are also depicted in the play. And for those who have no fucking idea what I'm talking about, there's a fucking 5-hour long video if you want to really get into it. But the other thing is that there's in the Jesse opening of the goddess discussion. Am I gone? Oh no, I thought my screen dimmed.
You're back.
Cool. The Jesse segment of the Loveless play, you see the blue dressed soldier sort of like romancing. It's like they've kind of come together. The reunion is sort of taken place with the lovers, but there are flashes to a darker world where they're being pulled away from each other. And those two things happening at the same time is essentially the ending of Rebirth, but then the subsequent things that happen and the rest of the story feel very Part 3 to me, if that makes sense. I do feel like Rebirth is way more self-contained. Like, a lot of the mysteries that are going on in there are pretty much answering only Rebirth questions for now, other than the Aerith discussion, which is also a part of that. So there's glimpses of Part 3, but I think essentially Remake and Rebirth mysteries all give us the information of what to expect in Part 3, but mainly only answer its own internal questions. So yes, I do think that there are things that also allude to like what Part 3 will be, or will be emblematic of that. I also feel like Part 1 and 2 feel very, they're gatekeepy. They're keeping us sort of a little bit more in the dark than I think people are giving it credit for, which is a good thing. I think that Part 3 should be full of surprises and reveals and directions. Also, no promises at World's End or Journey's End is also very much
it essentially means the same thing as the Unknown Journey too, though.
Yes,
you know?
Exactly. It is. Yeah. It's just said differently. It's just meant to point more in the direction of, hey, dimwit, go look at the fucking Loveless text.
Yeah, but
go look at the Loveless scene.
Yeah, and no promises at World's End is a really compelling sentence, because, isn't the World's End promised? And so I mean, there's a ton of ways to deconstruct the statement. It's kind of a masterwork of a paradox statement. I will answer the question of like what was kind of a surprise takeaway or a surprise thing that I think it really indicates stuff that we need to look at in Part 3, and it was actually both the Broden and Roche transformations, like their character arcs, I think are really important in ways that we don't don't have all the context for. There's something that Broden says too that sort of indicates that not all degradation looks the same, and it isn't going to affect everybody, period. And then not all soldiers are experience it the same way. And I think that there's red herrings associated with degradation applying to Cloud in the way that it applied to, say, Roche and Broden, whereas like I don't think he's just going to show up with a robe on, but I think he's going to have a very unique relationship with degradation. And I think you throw that in conjunction with the infinite potential shit with Chadley. I think there's something really deep and mysterious there. So, I was going to ask you before. I think
that's also interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, just really quickly, because I think that I think that this is also a discussion when you're talking about Broden's question, or the way that he responds to that is that degradation looks different for everybody. That's very in line with what we were just discussing just a moment ago about how people deal with death in the perception of a curse and like perceiving it in that way.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously Sephiroth's relationship to death now is being talked about in a very different way in Rebirth, being that it's like the beginning of something. Is that Broden's discussion feels more like death is an experience that is different for everybody. It's not the same. And what that looks like can very wildly be represented in different ways. You said something else in there that I was really interested about, but it escaped me. But I do think the infinite potential also being a very interesting discussion about what Sephiroth is meaning to create is another thing that comes to mind. Is that infinite and eternity are very intertwined in that way. So it definitely is pointing major signals back to what Sephiroth is looking for with Cloud, in that sense. And the fact that the infinite potential is something that I've also touched on for happiness and suffering, being that these two things are the source of power for both sides. It feels like, meaning that like Aerith's world seems to be powered by rainbows and happiness, and Sephiroth is literally a harvesting of despair. And if Cloud is able to feel infinite amounts of these things, he could potentially create that world for Sephiroth, like quite literally. So, but that would also make Cloud the center of that world, meaning like the world would be born from Cloud specifically, not figuratively. So
I was going to ask you about Loveless, but I think you covered that kind of as, I think something that I love about like the presentation of Loveless throughout everything now is that we get this classic version of it too. And the fact that the classic version has characters that we see later in the Temple of the Ancients is a really cool, like, hey, this is a prophetic work. It really matters. It really matters. But I also love that the poster in Midgar represents Loveless as a modern work. The actress is clearly, in contemporary clothes. And so I think it really feeds this idea of like a loop or a spiral, being like kind of thematic to Loveless as a, sort of a recurring anchor point for, the poetry of Final Fantasy VII to work in like a referential way, but not necessarily like a just repeating the same shit over and over way. I do like that as an observation for that. I think we've accumulated some really good questions in the audience, so I'm going to shift us over to audience questions. So here's one from Stray Chocobo, and is the Emerald Witch being depicted as summoning meteor in that mural in the Temple of the Ancients? And if so, what do you think that represents? So it's weird to me the way that I looked at that mural, and I could look at this a bunch of different ways, and I've looked at it several times. The way that I looked at the picture was that, it looked like maybe the Emerald Witch was containing meteor into the temple. But then when you grab the keystone, the color coding changes, and she turns from green to red. So she turns from the Emerald Witch to basically, the Shadow Blood Queen, sort of in depiction. And so I do think yes, sort of. To answer your question, I think that there is some element of it that says that when you've taken the keystone and she's red or scarlet, I think it's sort of supposed to mean that, Genova's will of obliterating the planet has been imposed upon Sephiroth. So in a sense she is. But I think that when you first see it, it's more supposed to represent the story of the Temple of the Ancients and how the keystone was created as a method to contain the black materia. What do you think?
I'm almost in the process of thinking about this question, sort of shifting my perspective on it, or it could just be that the thought that is occurring now is just a part of the myriad of different things that this scene represents, which includes your point. But one of the things that I take away from that scene now, looking at it like right now, is that the Gi are emblematic of the Black Whispers at a certain point, where we see that they are outnumbered. They are not like, they're not the majority, and therefore their world is sort of on the run. They're powerless. The Gi are also powerless, but sort of created an opening for them to sort of have their end be realized through the black materia. And this question now starts to bring, and I think that this is also very a part of the Gi story, but it's sort of a history is written by the victor sort of mentality, and that goes both ways. Is that I feel like the story told on the walls is very much the way that it can be initially interpreted. Is that there's like this goddess that came down on and this battle happened and meteor was contained. But once you take the black materia, history almost begins to tell a different story, because that's the world now that is going to be created. Is the world that is emblematic of the red imagery that is then created. And I feel like this is very reflective of the story that Sephiroth is telling to Cloud. Mm-hmm. This is that, and the way that Cloud perceives reality is as Sephiroth is presenting it to him, as opposed to the reality. But at the end, will it be the reality? Will that be the one that wins out? Is Sephiroth's perception of what Cloud is, or what Cloud actually is to him? But it won't matter if one will completely be negated. There will be no other reality. There will only be a singular reality at the end of this. And I think that goes back to what everyone's been saying about sort of the ending of part 2 is that the potential of all of these other worlds could have just ended and we could just be in one, which I'm not exactly sold on, but that definitely plays into this idea. I do feel like this is accurate to why the idea of the chicken and the egg discussion is so confusing is because it almost seems unimportant. But what does seem important is the actions that are taking place right now, and that they somehow are affecting both past and future in this way. And I think that that's what I think might end up being the focus of the discussion is that the singular point of time where these decisions are being made are literally affecting the entirety of what reality is shaped life like, both again in the past and in the future. So I don't, and also there is a very chicken and egg situation with the goddess, because the goddess coming down from the meteor is very Genova, and just because there's a different depiction of her on the wall, in just like the other side of the wall, doesn't change the imagery that the Emerald Witch is associated with. And it also, the idea of it being a witch is also concerning. It's not like she's a maiden or anything like that. She's also using magic to, and witchcraft is, you know, it implies manipulation to me. And then also what we see at the end is that the queen, at the end of the Queen's Blood arc, which unfortunately I've spoiled for myself, I'm just going to come out and say it because it was too interesting for me not to sort of explore it a little bit more, is that the Genova card is imprisoned and then can be used. You don't use the card as it is. You use the Cetra imprisoned, you know, card in play. So it feels like in the same discussion, it's a giant cycle that is being controlled, which is also being hinted at, by the way, in the other aspects of Final Fantasy VII stories, is that there is a person behind, the man behind the curtain in Rufus's story, in Glenn's story, in Midgar, in all of these other aspects. So it feels like what is a perceived enemy in Rebirth and in Final Fantasy VII is not the truth. That we do not have the full scope of this. And also, even based off of what Aerith says in the Temple of the Ancients, is that life and death are part of the same coin. And if that is the case, with like Genova being more of a representation of death than life, and that the Cetra are a representation of life in the way that the life stream is, that they are entirely the same thing, or they are being used to the same means to an end by somebody. And that in itself, and I also feel like this is very true of Sephiroth, is I almost feel like if you are talking about the creation of the world being made in the present, that Sephiroth could very easily have already realized his world in the future, and we are just living that story, is that Sephiroth is already the god of the world, or the goddess, in this eternity, and that from the moment that he's been sort of in a part of the life stream, is he's sort of past, present, and future Sephiroth, sort of, and we're just sort of a part of his, you know, world already. There's a very interesting way of going in any interpretation of this, I think, that also feels very explanatory and very fulfilling, but it only will make sense if it plugs back into the characters, which some of the options I think we've just spitballed do.
Yeah,
but,
they do.
You know, we'll see.
Next question. Will Sephiroth learn about Lucrezia? If so, what could potentially be his reaction to the revelation? I think there will be much more Lucrezia stuff in part 3, I really do. Or possibly a DLC. If Sephiroth has exposure to her, I would say that he will just... I don't think we'll see... I think he'll be too far gone. And that we might see a struggle, but ultimately it'll just be that she was never my mother. You know, something like that. I don't think it's enough to break at this point, or we'll get some acknowledgement that he shed the bondage of that attachment somehow. What are your thoughts on Lucrezia? She's due for.
I think I'm pretty much a glow up, like a complete redux of her character.
Yeah.
She is. I think that you're right. I think there's something that Philip said that resonates with me is that I think if he were to have learned the truth, I feel like that would feed more into the idea that everything that his life has been a lie, and also that things need to be rebuilt because of that thing. But I don't think that ultimately, I know that, and this is something that is very key to Sephiroth even now, is that he proclaims himself the son of Genova, meaning like he does still, that still resonates quite a bit with who he believes himself to be. And his association to that is very strong, which is very interesting to me because it does very much feel like there is a different. So I know that people like to really hound on the Horcrux sort of plot element of like Kingdom Hearts and other media because it's been just done to fucking death, and understandably so. I do feel like the way that Sephiroth is revealed to us in different occasions feels like different parts of him, as opposed to, how like I like to take a note out of like Final Fantasy X, how you fight Sin, different Sin body parts, but not like the full thing until like later on. I feel like we are fighting perceptions of Sephiroth that are not entirely him, but just a piece of him that is sort of like being revealed. Whereas like in the end, it feels like there's like Sephiroth is sort of conjoining into one thing, because you're seeing like cuts between different realities where they're all fighting the same Sephiroth. They're all fighting Sephiroth Reborn, and they're seemingly all connected to the one that is, controlling all of these other aspects. That's the one takeaway from Remake that still hasn't, I think, completely settled with me and doesn't feel answered in Rebirth, is that there was a huge question about who are all these different Sephiroths, and it feels like they dropped that question not because it's not relevant, but more or less because they've given us the piece of that already in Remake, and they want us to ponder it in Rebirth more. Is like the Sephiroth showing up with the Black Wing, I think is it's actually feeling like a less genuine Sephiroth to me now as I continue to see him. That it's not the real Sephiroth, but just like an avatar of him, so to speak. Sort of like in the way that Genesis is sort of created like a manifestation of himself, in the same way that Sephiroth Reborn feels very much like that. I feel like the Edge of Creation Sephiroth without his wing is more or less the real Sephiroth. I just don't know how that ties in quite literally. So I do think that Lucrezia's part in this discussion, and the reason why I spiraled into this discussion, is that I think that the discussion of pieces of what make up Sephiroth are really important, and I think Lucrezia will play in a big part in that, because it's a very important part of Ever Crisis's depiction of him. I think that at some point we will touch on that in a serious way that will build on his character, and they should, because it feels like now there's more emphasis on that than ever. So more Lucrezia because of Sephiroth's development, just by de facto,
Agreed. Great question here. And this one has bothered me a lot, and I hope we get an answer for this. Useless Hoarding asks, it seems that most agree now that that the interlude worlds are in the life stream at this point. They're within the planet. However, we also see what it looks like when Tifa falls into the life stream. What do we think the difference between these two perceptions is? Right? And that's an interesting question, because when Tifa falls in to the literal physical life stream, her body, she sees it as like this glowy, Mako-y life stream illusion type thing, or not illusion, but like hologram.
An ocean.
Yeah, like a hologram, and we see like, you know, this. Whereas if the dream worlds that the interlude are in do not have that quality at all, they in fact have consequences. They have, you know, they have people die in those dream worlds. You know, like you do damage to stuff. People are talking about how, you know, they'll never, like their unborn baby will never, you know, see the world. You know, like it's very concrete, and there are people in it that are, you know, like alive in the, you know, main continuity. So there is a very mechanically meaningful distinction between the live stream sequence that Tifa experiences in chapter 9 and the interlude. What do we think is mechanically at play there? And I don't really have a good answer other than that maybe it's because she's physically fallen into the live stream instead of being ushered into it by a Cetra, which is what it seems like has happened to Zack, Biggs. You know, like basically Aerith has manifested all of those characters be there because they all seem to have a connection to Aerith. You know, so it seems like Aerith is sort of the physical connection, which is again why I'm starting to lean into this idea that the Whispers are actually the Cetra. One of the reasons I say this,
I get exactly where you're going. Okay,
I
that's
doubt
actually
it.
Really
I
good.
doubt it. So at the end of the interlude sequence, when you've been pushed out of it, and Delta Sin pointed this out, but it's something that I've noticed early on. When you kind of finally exit, like the live stream tunnel, you do so directly into the face of a Whisper. It is a extremely precise shot. And so I do really feel like the Whispers are ushers into, like they're like a translation that souls can use to actually see the live stream as this, you know, active living space instead of this outsider's perspective that Tifa has. Okay, your hand is raised, SLEEPEZI. Dump on it.
It's because so there, I think this is why Rebirth is just kind of being slept on in certain places, is that people have created general definitions of how things work, but the actual physical, like how deep a mechanic runs, is almost endless. And without knowing like the heart of the actual art itself, like what is the linchpin of the entire reason why the story is being told, it's really hard to find the bottom. But to your point, ushers of the planet, in the sense that in Remake we see Whisper's guide like Cloud through after he falls down in the plate. You have the petals come up and sort of surround him and then guide him to the light world. This use of transition in Rebirth happens all the time at this point in the game that you're discussing, which is that as soon as Cloud comes back into the reality, you see multiple different wipes of different Whispers passing by the camera, thus signaling a change in world or a different perception of world. It's all dependent on which Whisper is doing what and which world we are now perceiving, and there's subtle changes happening all the fucking time. Even in the scene right before the meteor shows up again, and that whole sequence plays out with Cloud and the party, where we see the Remake sequence replayed. a feather comes in front of, or a whisper passes by the camera again, and it passes by at the end of the sequence too, is that we are constantly switching between like the control of one or the other. Is what it's like, what is guiding what to where? It becomes an incredibly difficult thing to decide. But I do think, to go even further into the actual question that we started off with, is that we also have this is why Rebirth is like on such a different level and so cool, is that you have Aerith feeling Zach's touch while her hand is grazing in the live stream through the boat. So clearly there's a connection between, you know, the live stream world that we see with Zach and everybody else, and the world that we are, you know, the more realized world and the world that our main characters are experiencing. So there's some way that these two worlds are sort of more cohesive in the way that we perceive reality than the Tifa live stream sequence, but it's all happening in the same way. The other thing that sort of is interesting about that is that we can look back at Ever Crisis. I think that the difference between Tifa's segment and the world segments is we're talking about the threads of the live stream as opposed to the overall live stream itself. And also, to your point, it also depends on how you are existing in that space at the same time. So for Tifa, she's an alive person in the live stream as a fully fledged human being, just swimming in Mako. And the images are appearing to her, which also feel like it's her perspective also being projected onto the space, which is why she's arriving in the places that she is. So she is being guided, and she is being guided by the White Whispers in that too, and also by the weapon. Also, you have to also consider that Tifa's being protected by the weapon.
She's inside the Magnus materia at the time. As
soon as the Sephiroth stabs the materia, we go into the white space for Tifa. So there's that. There's in Ever Crisis, Sephiroth talking about the threads intertwining, which is what creates worlds. And then when we zoom into those threads, we go into the Crisis Core introduction, Sephiroth fighting Zack and Cloud. So those all feel like parts of a definition of clarification to that. But to your point, I think the Cetra being the black cloaked figures is 100% the case. I think that your perspective of that is accurate. I also feel like Aerith's connection to the Cetra and guiding and choosing how to guide one's soul into these spaces is also relevant.
Yeah.
There's gonna have to be a video that somebody does eventually. I hope it's not me. That breaks down each, because what it's talking about at some point is over like the layers of existence, is Sephiroth's reborn self. That it's in his description where he's talking about the layers of existence. And that's what we're perceiving, is the layers of each existence. So
yeah,
it's complicated. It's very complicated and very interesting. I'm very interested in this discussion. It's just about what starts where, chicken egg, and then finding a start.
All right. Well, I've got a doozy for you. Okay, because there, and I'm going to provide some context too. So, somebody asked about the significance of the white and black feathers in Rebirth. And something that I noticed too, and I think Delta noticed this, is that the Genova mural does have a blackbird and a white bird flying in the opposite directions. Oh, look, and he says, makes me think of Wings of Light and Dark in Loveless. So what's going on with these wings? All right, like, and the other depiction of like a of wings too that seems relevant is in Ever Crisis, at the end of the first soldier. It is not a mistake. It is the most obvious shot where there is a white cloud-formed wing that appears in the framing of Sephiroth's victory shot when he saves the folks. So there's this depiction of him having a white wing, which is made of cloud. And then what we see ultimately of him is the black wing. So talk about this.
Talk about stuff. Here we go. So, you know how we were just discussing the camera wipes with the whispers?
Yeah.
First place that started, dude, is with the feathers. You know where that first feather came from? Genesis, in the secret ending of fucking Dirge of Cerberus. You think that they haven't thought about this, chat? You don't think that they've thought about this for years? We've been talking about this for years. Yeah. This is the most unhinged SLEEPEZI your discussion you're gonna get, because the whole aspect of that is that whispers are connected to white and black wings just by that, but also wings have everything to do with dreams, because the wings are represented in Edge of Creation, are said to be Sephiroth's wing, which now we know that there are two because of Ever Crisis, two different depictions of a white wing and a black wing depicted in Edge of Creation. Those make up the universes that we see in that scene. And we know that those universes and the wings are connected to dreams. To be able to wings are used as a means thematically to reach dreams. So if by literally, let's just do some basic math here, is that if Clark is saying that a white wing is represented by Cloud as Sephiroth's wing, and that in order to reach dreams you must have a wing, is that Cloud must use Sephiroth, or Sephiroth must use Cloud to reach his dream, which is the thing that he's staring at the Edge of Creation. So if that universe is also a wing, literally what I just said is that the center of that would have to also be Cloud. So literally Sephiroth is going to birth an entire universe literally with Cloud as like the seed to that world. It's fucking fantastic. Wings of Light and Dark is a Loveless thing. Don't even fucking get me started on that. But Wings of Light and Dark, it's absolutely true, but it also is emblematic of, again, Jenova, and what is fact and what is fiction is essentially what we're talking about. One is factual, one is fiction. I'm gonna stop there because I feel like I'm about to start tearing down my green screen and putting up a conspiracy wall. Anyway, do you have anything to say to it, or anything to add to what I just sort of rambled about for like 5 seconds?
Nah, man, you got it. You got it.
Horrible.
Okay.
This is just one of those things where it's like I've been talking about this for years, and the fact that that people are saying it's like, well, I connect with this game. It's like, you have no fucking idea, chat. We've been talking about this shit for too long that it feels almost repetitive at this point to repeat. But it's gonna be great. That's all you need to know. It rhymes, all of that stuff. So,
okay, Minerva. There's a Minerva question, and I'm just gonna ask you about Minerva because it's I'm tagged in the question, but it's actually a statement, and so I'm not gonna. The statement is, my suspicion is that the pain and spite that feeds the planet might be what transforms Minerva into Jenova. I'm not prepared to explore that space yet, but you might be. okay, so like the Minerva thing has come up forever with us because like she's got that a kind of mixture of color schemes between the gold and the purple, and also there's the the Cetra depiction on the mural, and then now there's like this Shadow Blood Queen stuff, and so and Minerva's a goddess, she's one of the way that Loveless depicts all these characters, it feels like a lot of the characters shift roles a lot. But there's this, intermingling of roles that each character goes through. But it does feel like Minerva was like very specifically the goddess, and that they did use a lot of her design moving forward. Do you think we'll see Minerva in some fashion concretely moving forward? In either DLC or Part 3.
There'll be definitely. It would be really cool to have a summon of her.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be like the farthest we would go for that. I think. I think that Minerva is more emblematic of the Grey Whisperer world, as opposed to now what we have with Queen's Blood, which is sort of a separation. You already kind of touched on the fact that there are aspects of Minerva's design that sort of imply that there's sort of two halves of something made whole in that, which is also very much the way that Glenn is describing the way that the world will eventually become. This thing is like just fragments of something made whole. I think that the Emerald Witch, and just to clarify, what is the queen's name? Like the full
Shadowblood Queen?
Name of the queen? Shadowblood Queen. Is that the Emerald Witch and the Shadowblood Queen both have imagery that heavily refer to Minerva separately, more so the Emerald Witch, just because of the length of the hair, the way that the crown is like depicted, and in the mural even more so. Which I think is more of the Emerald Queen's depiction in the meteor. That imagery is pretty much dead on Minerva. I'm not sure if what has been done is a rewrite of that stuff, and this is sort of like the more digestible version of sort of that discussion for people without being so on the nose, which it is pretty on the nose, but it's a little bit more ambiguous now and more feeds into the mystery, whereas Minerva is, I don't know, a part of a game that people have trouble digesting. But I feel like anytime I have that thought now, I feel like I'm wrong because of just all the stuff that they've done to sort of feed into Crisis Core lore. So to answer the question, I do think that Minerva still has a place in this discussion. I feel like if we have Genesis, we will probably have Minerva expanded lore. So I think that would be interesting to see elaborated on. I think that you probably would get Minerva in some sort of really ridiculous Cetra scene, but I'm not putting my money down on it, I guess is what I would say. I put more money down on Genesis showing up, and I do think that he will.
Okay, so that's next question. Will Genesis show up? And your answer is yes?
I think 100%. Not even a question about that. I think that's like asking the least now. Based off of everything that we've already gotten. I feel like they've pretty much, not for lack of a better word, completely set up the stage for that to happen. Only because he's so relevant to this discussion, and I feel like what Rebirth has done so well is redefine our perception of looking at already existing material. And I think that that's actually one of the greatest things Rebirth could have ever done, because it really makes somebody like me have to kind of go back and really reassess things in the way that Rebirth is sort of shaping them. And it feels like Nojima, even when he was talking about the soundtrack, where he was like, I wish I had like made more sense of this as I was making it like the first time, because it's very clear how dedicated he was to connecting everything back together. Genesis is a part of that. Genesis is very much a part of the discussion of what Sephiroth is doing right now. It's actually kind of interesting to me that Ever Crisis is going to Angeal first. As a background, I almost expect whatever the Angeal Sephiroth Ever Crisis chapter to end up being is like a reveal of a Genesis chapter of the three of them. That would be my bet for that. But as far as the game is concerned, kind of like what we were talking about with Lucrezia, is that the pieces of something are important. And I would really think that we would be missing out if we didn't have Genesis somehow connected and emotionally relevant to the discussion of what's happening. Also, we still have that Dirge of Cerberus ending wide open, and that needs conclusion. And I think that there's already something being made to sort of an effort made to solve that. So.
Okay. So, Counterpoint says, I was wondering if you could clarify what Sephiroth meant when he said to Aerith, I underestimated you. Do you want to answer what you think?
Yes. I do. I think that Sephiroth, like in the most thematic way possible, we're talking about consciousness in that scene. I think that Sephiroth has pushed out Zack in that scene. He's separated because worlds merging is also a stage for consciousness to be collective, to be whole, and Cloud's, all of the important people in Cloud's mind that are relevant in Advent Children seemingly show up in that final scene in Rebirth. Sephiroth is trying to remove those things. Aerith has found her way to give a piece of herself to Cloud, and you can perceive this as the materia, the black materia and the holy materia, but in the terms of the way that the game is explaining this is the goddess's blessing. Is that a piece of them, of Sephiroth and of Aerith, are a part of Cloud. And so the world that Sephiroth is creating, this barren wasteland, and when Aerith arrives with her white whispers that come out of, nowhere, seemingly, and sort of wipe Sephiroth's world away, is the underestimated part. But, as we've already stated, is that she's already done this once before. She's already done that in the remake sequence where the Whisper Harbinger explodes and the white wind carries the party onto the water surface that is a vast ocean. But now it is drying up. This is the last time we will probably see this happen, in my opinion. Is that I don't think that Aerith will be able to show up for Cloud in the way that she is right now. But yeah, I think that that's essentially what Sephiroth is saying, is that he's underestimated the amount of influence that she still has left in her even after death, and that and also if you look at the context of the scene is that the lead into that scene is Sephiroth having just been beaten by the entirety of the party that is all in separate times and spaces, and he's facing away from Cloud and I think that the reason for that imagery is to not show weakness, is that Sephiroth has been hurt, but he's facing away from Cloud, and then he sends the Black Whispers to just kind of deal with him. And then for her to show up, it's like, oh, well, she's coming in at the most inopportune time for Sephiroth in this particular moment. And that leverage is no longer there. So he's just like, oh, I underestimated you because you're showing up at this really improper time, and that you're still somehow like fighting to the surface to still be able to protect Cloud. And that's pretty much it.
I think, I mean, I agree. I think the most basic interpretation is that Sephiroth made a play at Cloud's mind and failed as a result of what Aerith provided for Cloud, which was, I think, a space to create a reality or dream where he was successful in saving her, just as a stopgap to prevent him from getting lost to Sephiroth, because that was clearly Sephiroth's goal. There was to get him to reunite. He said, I see that you resist. Perhaps you need a little push. Next scene, he draws Cloud directly into a space where he alone witnesses the death of Aerith. And that's the push. That push did not work because of Aerith. It's that simple. I don't think it's an indication of Aerith's real physical state. I also do think too that, on a grander scale, we know that the space where the Edge of Creation happens, with Cloud and Sephiroth, that's a psycho-spiritual place that's supposed to represent kind of Cloud's mind, and we know that from Ultimania Omega, which describes it that way. And with Sephiroth there, it has the appearance that it does. But when Aerith shows up, we've now added water, right? And I think that's really, really clearly, representative of that Cloud's mind is now comprised of two different external sources feeding it, imagery and memory and material by which to build itself with, both the meteor and the water, both destruction and healing. It's just really, it's more thematic than mechanical from my perspective. So, okay, with two more questions. And one is, what were your thoughts on... first of all, I don't know if you actually saw this. Did you see the Gilgamesh and Sephiroth scene?
I don't think so.
Oh, man. Okay, well, we'll come back to that question, but it was kind of wild. Like, so if one of the proto relic quests, all of the robe clones are trying to grab one of the proto relics, and whispers show up, black whispers show up, and then materialize into Sephiroth, who then summons Gilgamesh, and then he says something along the lines of, I'll let you deal with him, this wayward soul. I'll let you deal with this wayward soul. And then Gilgamesh shows like enmity towards Sephiroth, like kind of in a equalish footing, feeling absolute disdain for being summoned by churls. And churls mean like a mean-spirited person. Like, how dare this mean person summon me? It was kind of wild to see that exchange, but you should go look at it is the answer to that. But we'll, on the next episode that you're here, which I'm sure will happen like several more times before Rebirth or before Afterbirth, you can do that. So, okay, this will be the last question. And it is, okay. Okay, so in part 3, we will have to address the weapons, okay? But now we have a much more sympathetic relationship with them. Do you think the way that we interact with weapons will be treated as like we have to make this horrible choice where we fight the planet to save people? Or do you think something comes into play where the weapons get corrupted and we have to fight them that way? Is this part of like the multi-stage war? Because we've already seen like Sephiroth is literally infecting both sides of the war between Wutai and Shinra. Do you think that that's a thing that will extend into the weapons?
So I think that you probably already know my answer. It might be because my audio is too loud, by the way. Sorry. Not my headphones are really close to the mic. Sorry if there's some overlap on dialogue here. But something that one of the Ultimanias earlier on suggests is that actually Sephiroth was in control of or had corrupted the weapons from the very beginning. So like even in the original game, there is suggestion that Sephiroth is sort of turning the weapons against, you know, things in his favor. And the ending of Rebirth is suggesting with the weapon shot is that the Whispers are gathering around the weapons and they're like able to sort of bat them away. We see that in the Tifa livestream sequence where they're able to roar and kind of dispel them, but they're becoming more outnumbered, which is also the ending and the suggestion in the Forgotten Capital is that Sephiroth's influence in this world is becoming sort of singular in aspect. So I do think that now the reason I don't like where my train of thought is going is that it removes the one good part of ambiguity that the original game has, which is that I think that the whole point of the weapons sort of being more for the planet than for human life is an interesting discussion, because it's about the long term rather than the short term lives that only last 90 years and then, you know, a planet that lasts hundreds of thousands, right? So I think that ambiguity would be sorely missed. I think that would be a disservice for the story, most likely, unless I'm just thinking of an angle that thinking in like too narrow of an angle to see the benefit of that. But that's the thing about Rebirth is that it definitely has surprised me with several decisions that have ended up working out being better than I could have imagined. Yeah, I do think that the weapon is also a good example of this. I don't know about the classification of weapon in regards to that now is accurate, but there definitely are aspects that are similar. I'd be interested in exploring that maybe in a different discussion. I don't know. I do think that it's not gonna be, I really hope that it's just not a black and white discussion. I don't think that that's where we're heading. That's the clear thing, but also the way that the game has set it up to be is that. So I think I'm just missing something. I think that they will do a good job with it. Yeah. Okay.
Last real question, and we'll close with this. Any shot, Aerith survives or is brought back to life somehow?
No. Okay. I don't think so. I think one of the things I was going to mention before closing out is that if you guys look at the original game with Holy and the setup of that is that the way that works is that you go to the altar, you pray at the altar, and that is the closest place for essentially for your voice to be heard, your wish to be heard by the planet. What Holy is the dream of Aerith. That is to the capacity that she now exists in my mind. And I think that that's where that character's send-off is the most powerful. That is the most, I think, influential aspect of Aerith going forward. And I don't think that that's undermining her character. I think that that actually better creates the narrative of like the world that all of the characters now hope for is the dream that they will fight for, that is Aerith's, but also theirs. So now Aerith is more symbolic of the idea of this idea of collective consciousness, that she's like there but she's not there. She is present but not in the way that she used to be. She is not the same thing anymore. And I think that that resonates with me because it feels like in that sense she is gone, and that I do feel emotionally like hurt in the way that she is no longer the character that she was. But now she is something more than that, and I do feel like the game does a very good job of keeping those things separate. And I also think that literally with the way that the game ends is that she says one thing to Cloud, and the game says immediately something that contradicts it, which is that she's like, I promise. Or like, do you promise? And then Cloud's like, I promise. And then the game's like, there are no promises. So, I feel like that's also when rewatching Advent Children, I get the impression of the most is that she's a part of Cloud in a way that's more interesting than if it were to just be like a Force ghost showing up. It feels like something more is happening, and that she's a part of something more, and that I don't know how to explain this, because I know that it feels emotionally diminishing for so many, but it feels very like emotional to me. Like that resonates a lot clearer.
I fully agree. Wow. That's a great place to end. So thank you so much for watching, YouTube. Really appreciate it. So let's just wave goodbye, YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.